We in the United States are 4.2% of the world's population. We do not run the world. We are not world leader. We are a country of 4.2% of the people in a big, diverse world, and we should learn to get along. The main point, Amy, is that we are not using diplomacy. We are using weaponry. This sale now announced to Taiwan that you've been discussing this morning is just another case in point. This does not make Taiwan safer. This does not make the world safer. It certainly doesn't make the United States safer. This goes back a long way. I think it's useful to start 30 years ago. The Soviet Union ended, and some American leaders got it into their head that there was now what they called the unipolar world, that the U.S. was the sole superpower and we could run the show. The results have been disastrous. We have had now 3 decades of militarization of American foreign policy. A new database that Tufts is maintaining has just shown that there have been more than 100 military interventions by the United States since 1991. It's really unbelievable. And I have seen in my own experience over the last 30 years, working extensively in Russia, Central Europe, in China, and in other parts of the world, how the U.S. approach is a military first and often a military only approach. We arm who we want. We call for NATO enlargement no matter what other countries say may be harmful to their security interests. We brush aside anyone else's security interests, and when they complain, we ship more armaments to our allies in that region. We go to war when we want, where we want, whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq or the covert war against Assad in Syria, which is even today not properly understood by the American people, or the war in Libya. And we say we're peace-loving. We specialize in perpetual war for 2 reasons. One, wars are almost always a mistake because they are an attempt to address political issues through military means in a completely flawed way. And then once in, they can't be stopped almost without exception, or at least until 15 or 20 years has led to exhaustion. So we were in Afghanistan for 20 full years from 2001 to 2021. Biden used his first year to pull out of Afghanistan. I thought maybe there would be a year of peace, but that was a little naive on my part, because instead of negotiating with at the end of 2021 over very pertinent issues like the enlargement of NATO to Ukraine, which is the main casus belli of this war. Organizing alliances, building up weaponry, trash-talking China, having Speaker Pelosi fly to Taiwan when the Chinese government said, please lower the temperature, lower the tensions. We say no. We do what we want, and now send more arms. This is a recipe for yet another war. And in my mind, it's terrifying. We are at the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I've studied all my life, and I've written a book about the aftermath. We are driving to the precipice, and we are filled with our enthusiasm as we do so, and it's just unaccountably dangerous and wrong-headed, the whole approach of U.S. foreign policy, and it's bipartisan. Disproportionate power of the Western world, and especially the Anglo-Saxon world, which started with the British Empire and now the United States, is about 250 years old, so a short period in world history. It happened for a lot of very interesting reasons that the Industrial Revolution came to England first. Biden said, I will not negotiate. So we find ourselves back at war once again. I find all of this deeply disturbing, but am extraordinarily worried that we are about to enter
because we are actually in two fronts now. One is the war in Ukraine, which continues to threaten to expand because, again, the model now is never allow defeat. If anything is on that path, escalate, which is not good when it's two nuclear superpowers. That's a pretty dangerous logic, but that is the prevailing logic. And if you criticize it, you're called an apologist, which I am not. I want to say right at the beginning. I am nobody's apologist. I just don't like perpetual wars and think that we ought to use other means to resolve these issues. But the United States doctrine, unfortunately, is now rather explicit, and that is that to be secure, the U.S. must be the predominant power in each region of the world. So I liken it to a game that I played when I was young called Risk, which is a board game where the aim of the game is to have your piece on every part of the world map. And if you have your pieces on all but a few parts of the map, those places where you don't control win back the territory that you have. So you're trying to have every piece on the board. Well, the United States has military bases in 80 countries around the world. But alas, for the United States, there are 193 countries, so there's a lot of wars to go. Because every place where we have a base, but there isn't a base next door, Americans feel a threat, or we're told to feel a threat. And moreover, of course, and the deeper point is, China is now perceived by the United States as an existential threat to American primacy, because American policymakers cannot understand how we made the mistake of letting China become a powerful country. The right model is what he called the stalemate machine, which is never admit defeat before the next election. But since there's always a next election, you never have the opportunity to admit defeat. It was only with Richard Nixon's impeachment that actually Gerald Ford was able to end the war in Vietnam. Otherwise, it would probably have gone on for another 50 years if it had been continuous presidential administrations.
What's wrong with Russia and China? They are so warlike. They're out to undermine the world, and we end up in terrible confrontations. The war in Ukraine, just to finish the introductory view, could have been avoided and should have been avoided through diplomacy. What President Putin of Russia was saying for years was, do not expand NATO into the Black Sea, not to Ukraine, much less to Georgia, which if people look on the map, straight across to the eastern edge of the Black Sea. Russia said, this will surround us, this will jeopardize our security, let us have diplomacy. The United States rejected all diplomacy. I tried to contact the White House at the end of 2021. In fact, I did contact the White House and said, there will be war unless the U.S. enters diplomatic talks with President Putin over this question of NATO enlargement. I was told the U.S. will never do that. That is off the table. And it was off the table. Now we have a war that's extraordinarily dangerous, and we are taking exactly the same tactics in East Asia that led to the war in Ukraine.
Ukrainians are dying, Americans are fighting, funding, and defining the war aims. So this goes back a long time. My political life began marching on the streets of Detroit, Michigan against the Vietnam War. My political awareness began with the Pentagon Papers, which explained that American leaders lied repeatedly about the war, mainly to get to the next election. And Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, wrote a wonderful essay in 1970, which has stuck with me for 52 years, where he
said the quagmire myth and the stalemate machine. And he was trying to explain why the U.S. was stuck in Vietnam. And he said that the usual